We live in a fast-paced and hectic world where it's easy to feel overwhelmed, stressed, and out of control. How do you manage all the competing pressures without losing sense of yourself? How do you stay focused enough to not only plot a path, but follow it? Welcome to Master Your Life, a show that offers inspiration, insight, and intelligence, as well as success stories from many walks of life that can show you how you can control your own destiny. Our knowledgeable and entertaining host and her guests give practical advice that you can use every day in the quest to master your life. Now, here's your host, Leaha Mattinson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's show. I'm so excited to have each and every one of you from wherever it is that you are on this beautiful planet tuning in with me today on Master Your Life. I've got a wonderful guest, functional neurologist, Dr. David Hardy. Dr. Hardy, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, I'm excited about today's episode too. So this should be good.
It's going to be a fun one. So for those of you who have tuned into our prior episodes, you'll know that Dr. Dave is from Red Deer, Alberta. He works out of the Collegiate Sports Center, and he's available on his social media. You can find all the information about him in the show notes. And if you're tuning in to this as a podcast, please come to the masteryourlife.ca website so that you can see us in our finery talking about things, and maybe we'll be doing some things, explaining things with our hands a lot. Who knows, but it's fun to see us in video and in person. So make sure that you tune in there. Dr. Dave and I have talked a lot about, we've had about 6 episodes now together talking about neurology and how the brain affects our development all the way through our life from birth to the grave, well, actually in utero to the grave. And now we're actually focusing in a little bit differently on the brain because Master Your Life is really about helping people to have the wisdom to get the life that they want. And so we have this idea of, I want this thing, and then our real life, and there's a space between those two things. And that space between the two things is stress. You know, so I really want a new car. I really want that nice looking husband or wife, or the successful person, or I want a successful job. I want to have an awesome family. And then what's actually happening in real life is you've got a job that you really didn't like. You're not doing that great a job at parenting. Your kids are driving you crazy and they're not listening to anything you have to say. And the person who you married, you look over and go, where did my partner go? My life is, this is not how I was planning for things to be. And so you yourself might be, doing some things that are causing you to have function in your life that are also not that great. So what we're talking about today really is, how does the brain help us to be more virtuous or moral or make better decisions? So Dave, maybe just you can weigh right in on it. We're going to get out a little neurology and talk maybe a little bit more about what is virtue and what is morality from your perspective.
Right. I would say morality is basically doing good in the world, whereas being more in tune with virtue is going to be how you want to actually proceed in the world and living up to your own expectations there. Morality is kind of a global thing. Everybody kind of thinks right from wrong, and of course there's different views on it, but there's basic underlying ones that we all follow and strive to make sure we do. And I guess, yeah, the difference would be one is universal and one is individual. And,
Right.
and they're both difficult to always follow, because of course we're only looking at the good side of human nature with both of those. Mm-hmm. And we're creatures, we're animals, and there's also the dark side of our psychology and our neurology that's just going to be there. And I think that, and the main thing is how we direct some of those bad impulses.
Right, quote unquote. Yes, for those of you who can't see the hand gestures, quote unquote, the bad things,
more
learnings,
nature into what's going to actually be of benefit to the world or to ourselves.
Yeah, and I love that differentiation. So what we're going to focus in for the most part on this episode would really be virtue, and virtue being that what's intrinsic to our own self. I had this great book that I pulled off the shelf for many years by John Bradshaw called Reclaiming Virtue. And it was one that I would give to clients regularly who were struggling in this sort of space of, well, what's even virtuous behavior and why do I keep going off in the weeds? And I had used that tome, I will call it. I pulled it off of my shelf so much because I struggled so much with wanting to create virtuous experiences in my life or within myself and coming upon these constant stumbling blocks. And, through reading his book, he really focused in on the sexual abuse in the church, in the Catholic church. And then throughout, he had been in seminary school. It's quite the story, which I won't dive into in depth here. But for anyone who's struggling in that area, it's a really good resource. And I had tabs all over the book. I had highlighted all over the book and underlined things. And I would go back and read it and read it and read it again and try to apply what his learnings had been. And still I struggled because it was this, the lack of understanding about how much your brain health affects your behavior. And at that time, I was eating a lot. I was 100 plus pounds overweight. So my whole system was actually affected, and my neurology wasn't great. So maybe we can just speak about how brain health, what that might have caused for in terms of struggle for me, and maybe if other people were experiencing that thing. Why does this overweight thing have bearing on virtuous behavior or the ability to actually make good decisions?
Yeah. And that's the huge one, because we all think we are in such great control of our own lives, and that we are the makers of everything we do, and that if we're feeling something, well, all we have to do is tell ourselves something else and everything becomes great. And
Right.
well, the thing is, when just think, when you're in a good mood, when you're feeling healthy, how well do you interact with other people? And it's a lot better than when you're stressed out, depressed, and feeling like your body is going to this junk mode.
Mm-hmm.
It just completely turns how our mood and our emotions are felt, and then of course how we project that to other people. So of course, when we're stressed out and all of a sudden somebody honks the horn at us, or our spouse starts yelling at us, we react differently, and usually way too too dramatically. And compared to, we walk in and we see a problem, and all of a sudden that becomes one of the day's challenges, and we rock it out. We're able to change somebody's mood, how they feel, just by consoling them, talking to them. And we're in control, basically, because our brain's functioning at a better level.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at all the things that decrease brain function, and that's going to be, stress is the biggest one. And then that leads to other things like overeating, or drinking too much, or smoking too much weed, or all these other problems. And then, of course, we become more irritable and we lash out at people more. So the biggest thing, if we want these interactions with other people and our relationships to be stronger and to feel better about how we're actually conquering the world, we need to look at the actual brain function and how we get that brain firing at top performance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in one of the previous episodes, we talk about sexual abuse. So for anyone who wants, to go into more detail about that and how it affects the brain, then please look back into that episode specifically, and you'll get more intel there. It's really important, because I think the idea, we point the finger at other people often about how they're not acting virtuous and how they're not. Well, look at that person over there. They're not acting very virtuous and they're not doing the right thing for their family. And I can't believe all their bad decision making.
Right now, the whole world is upside down, and it's everybody else's fault. And the huge cancel culture that's going on is just insane. It's always somebody else's fault. There's nothing right now going around saying, let's actually improve ourselves and get ourselves feeling better. It's all, how do you blame somebody else for how you feel, or for your own health? And
Mm-hmm.
that's completely the wrong approach. That's just getting us once again, more in this cascade of one problem leads to the next problem, leads to the next problem. And it's just this downward cycle, kind of related to the floating turd in the toilet going down.
It's not going.
Yes.
It's not going. It's not going. And so, yeah, if this is I want everyone just to take a moment who's listening to this podcast, because everyone who tunes in to Master Your Life, you're here because you're trying to improve your virtue, your own virtues. And so just take a second to give yourself a pat on the back for real and go, good job, and insert name here, that you're actually doing this work. People say, why did you start the podcast, Leah? Because I needed to have some standard to keep coming back week after week and going, okay, did I actually meet my own metric this week? So really, this was my tool for keeping me honest around things, right? So it's absolutely. So the people who tune in here, there's 120,000 or more that are downloading, listening, sharing, taking responsibility or trying to take responsibility and struggling, so that's why we keep coming back to, well, what's the tool this week that could help me? But the huge insight for me, really, when I got the diagnosis of the neurological illness, was that my brain, like, I kept going, I should just be able to champion through this thing. Like, I've got enough willpower, resourcefulness. I'm a all-star athlete. I've got all these really great things about me, and I still can't seem to find the willpower and sometimes even the inspiration to do what I said I wanted to do, which was to lose all this weight. Like, I keep sabotaging myself. I keep going, doing the same, even though I know, I keep doing the same old thing over and over again. It wasn't until I understand actually how much my neurology ran the show. It wasn't like, as people go, I just pray more. I'm like, that is not working. So clearly it is not because of that, my connection to God. There's something else going on here. And the blessing really has been that I can see that is throughout the world. I don't know very many people that really don't have some sort of a brain issue of some kind. So it gives us a bit of wiggle room to actually go, okay, so if it isn't just my lack of spirit, or that for some reason I'm being punished, then maybe if it's this neurological thing, what can I do to actually help myself? And part of that is recognizing maybe some other people who've been struggling with their neurology because people are coming out about it now. So we see athletes who are coming out about it. And maybe you can speak to that, Dave, some athletes and maybe even the abnormal psychology side of what do we see, as the far out behaviors of people who are struggling with brain health issues.
Yeah. Well, once again, we classify things, good emotions, bad emotions, but really they're human emotions. Mm-hmm. And of course, in athletics, especially being a contact athlete myself, one of the rushes was always that contact and hitting other people, mm-hmm. and getting that aggression out. So there is part of our psyche then that has that aggression and go forward side, that hunt side to us. And it's going to be a bigger drive in some people than others. And well, you take an athlete whose job is to be aggressive and to basically go on the field and be a killer, and then you give him a brain injury on top of it. So what commonly happens then is those impulses happen more kind of because those neurons that create that drive emotion are now unstable, is they'll fire unstably. So you'll get periods where it absolutely just goes off and becomes berserk. All these impulses driving you to want that aggression and anger and everything to this really extreme level, beyond what you would actually see on a football, rugby, hockey, our combat sport, is that it just goes through the roof then, those impulses. And then too, you damage the centers that are going to inhibit those parts as well. So you've got increased drive through these emotion centers, and then you also have this decreased inhibition to tell yourself to not do that. or it's unstable at different times. So it really becomes that thing that drives people over the edge.
Yeah, and the over the edge stuff, I think, like in real life, what that shows up like is explosive verbal language towards other people. The giving away of items, or gambling, or pornography to the nth degree, or big binges of either alcohol or drug use. The violence in people's homes from somebody who wasn't violent before but was a professional athlete. You hear that a lot of times from partners of people who have athletic spouses, and they'll say it's like they were only this way on the ice, or they were only this way on the football field, but when they had that head injury, then when they came home, this thing changed, and all of a sudden they were taking it out on me, they were taking it out on the kids. And it's like with puzzlement, we can't figure out why all of a sudden this person has become not virtuous, because that's not a virtue. A virtue isn't that you come home and you scare the shit out of your wife and your kids. That's not virtuous. And then the person who actually does that doubly feels shamed, and then they don't talk to anybody about it because first of all, they're told they're going to lose their livelihood if there's any of that, disclosure of that stuff.
Right.
It's gotten slightly better, but not 100% better in these professional sports. These guys are still the gladiators, and women are no better off. So, women who are going, oh, this like professional athletes is such a great thing. You've got a noggin too. And so when you see women becoming more impulsive and more angry, hostile, no impulse control, spending money, going on trips, ruining themselves financially, selling off their property. These are real. And maybe you found yourself doing those things, and you go, geez, I forgot that I had this head injury from however long ago, or, maybe you got fired from a job. You're just Joe Schmo person, not necessarily a professional athlete, but you've had a concussion. You go into work, and then all of a sudden you're behaving oddly, and you get censured by your boss or your supervisor. And then all of a sudden you find yourself out of work, scratching your head going, I don't even know what was going on there. I don't know why I was behaving the way I was behaving, but you're going
to see it show up differently. Like in men, of course, quite commonly is there's more physicality to it, and there is more of that drive to kind of the aggression side of things. But in women too, you start to see it more kind of once again in the anxiety side of things, and then also more so kind of with their husband or partner, more so kind of once again the blame or the nagging side of things as well. So it's more verbal versus physical in those cases. But once again, we're looking at the same mechanisms. We're looking at a brain that's not functioning properly, and it's causing people to act out against themselves or other people in inappropriate ways. And it's absolutely epidemic out there. And the key thing is that to realize that there's a cycle between brain health and mental health. So mental health is kind of how we process all the stress and things coming in the system, and how emotionally we kind of put it into a system for ourselves, whereas the brain health is going to be the physical side of things, how the pathways in the cells are actually working and firing. And of course, an emotional trauma leads to physical trauma and vice versa. So it's this big loop. And within healthcare, we're not going about it properly, because everything is right now geared towards more the mental health side of things, where we look at the counseling and talking side of things. Whereas we're probably not looking at how we improve brain function as well as we could. And the thing is, if you increase brain function, then the counseling and the psychology side of things comes better, and people get better results with that. So it's not that one needs to be explored more than the other. It's that both sides of those need to be working together and put into a system. And like the other day, it really clicked for myself too, is I was going through meditation, and anytime I hear guided meditation, it takes me out of that relaxed flow state. And I'm like, well, why would somebody talking throw me out of that? And I'm like, it's hitting more my left brain language centers, and it gets me more into this state where I want to think
Mhm.
versus being in my right brain where I'm hearing the melodies and sounds that start to get me to focus my brain energy more on my own body and getting my state to actually relax. So with a lot of men, I kind of see the same thing is they don't want to open up. So why are we getting them to talk when maybe it's driving the anxiety or the thinking or the centers that are actually causing the issue? Versus why don't we get the state to change first by focusing on different centers, and then what you see is men open up like nothing else. And all of a sudden, yeah, you get a man to realize that his state and anger has gone away for a little bit, and he opens up like nothing else because things have changed and he wants to start expressing how that happened.
Mhm.
So it's kind of this circle. Okay, well, where do we start with people? And the talk side of things, great for public awareness, everything else like what we're doing, but it might not be the first initial part where we want to actually get somebody who is maybe once again suffered a few concussions, isn't eating well, is self-stimming or going towards alcohol to kind of mask it. That already tells you that they're trying to change their state somehow. Well, can we do it in a positive way that actually rewires the brain instead of masks it, and then go into the processing side of our emotions and the counseling psychology side of it then? And I think with the male population that's being very reluctant to focus on mental health, then we'd be getting a lot more results and helping a lot more people. And of course, if there's less people that are acting out, then it's better for everyone. So it's just one of those things that we need to bring awareness to both the brain health and the mental health side of things.
Mhm.
And I think we're going to see a lot more people really improve their function and relationships around them. And vice versa, though. Some people need to start with the talk side of things because they're very reluctant to make any physical changes with themselves. That becomes very uncomfortable. And you need to process the emotions before you do the physical side of things. So it is this giant loop between the two of them.
Yeah. And so I love that when people say, where do you start? Well, you start with the first step of something. Because the whole people go, I want to know why am I doing this? This is the universal question of not ever getting anywhere. Why? What happened in my past that's making me do all this stuff? I'm going, it makes no difference what happened in your past because you might not even remember what's happened. What matters is that you actually do something. Sorry.
Once we get people starting, though,
Yes.
what usually happens next after there's a little bit of change?
Then there's a little traction.
Yeah.
And there's a little slide back sometimes.
After that traction goes along, it kind of plateaus, and then you see a lot of people self-sabotage.
Yeah.
And that's because it's uncomfortable. Like basically a brain pattern's a brain pattern, and it wants to use the most efficient patterns. And once you start taking it away from one very developed brain pattern to another, then it becomes very uncomfortable, even if we know we're on the right track.
Mhm.
And or it basically rears its ugly head again, and then people don't even know why they're self-sabotaging their own progress. So then somewhere along that line, we need to once again hone in on the psychology of processing. What's going on? Why do I want to go back to these horrible habits I know were making my life worse when I was seeing that progress? So it is really a back and forth between the two, and it becomes exciting now because we have a lot more awareness of ways we can change the brain function. And then of course there's more and more awareness to the mental health side of things too.
I love that. And the analogy I used for myself when I was first learning about the rewiring my brain. So about 13 years ago, when I got my genetic status, I went, my brain needs to be healthy no matter what the doctors say. So first of all, the belief I could go down the path of believing that this, is incurable, or I could go down the path of how am I going to make the best brain possible? Same thing with my losing the weight. So I lost the 100 pounds when I was about 31 and I've kept it off, which is almost unheard of. But so when I was working with psychologists along the way of this podcast, they said, how did you do that? Because it's so rare. It's so weird. And I said, well, I learned this little brain trick. And it was that, exactly to your point, is that we have the neurology. First of all, people have been misinformed by science for the past 400 years that the brain is hardwired. And so you think you can't change anything. This is just the way that I am. I hear that all the time. I'm the kind of gal who. I'm the kind of guy who. And I go, you don't even know who you are yet. Like if you actually knew about your brain, you would know that you have so much more control than you think. So when I was learning about this rewiring of the brain, Dr. Norman Deutsch had a great book out at that time. And maybe he's got a couple rounds of books. And I just went, there is evidence here. There's absolutely evidence that you can fix this. And I think everybody has a brain. Everyone can fix it if they want to in some capacity. So what I learned, go ahead.
Not just the rewiring of things that we talk and tell ourselves, because we're all aware neurons that fire together, wire together. But right now, basically the public perception is that, once again, with weight loss and everything else, it's our focus attention. And instead of, okay, well, is there another way we can decrease those impulses? Because there's some parts of the brain, most of the brain, you can't talk to. So you have to look at rewiring those centers as well. And Norman Deutsch did a great job with his books there, and fellow Canadian, I believe.
Yes, fellow Canadian, exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so the whole, I understood from psychology that I could have positive psychology, and that there was lots of good things that I could do prior to that to be happy and be well. But the actual grasping just how important your neurological health is. And science has only been able to measure such a small portion of it. This is the spirit, the aspect of me that is the feeling, understanding, sentient being that goes, just because science has only figured out 10% of that doesn't mean that the other 90% of my brain isn't being utilized in some way. It's just that science hasn't figured out what's going on there yet. So with that understanding, I know I go 100% of my brain is working for me all the time. That's my belief. And so when I stand at the top of what I call the mountain, so when you've got this, the path that's in the brain, that's the familiar thing. So whether that's with food, and for me, it was with sex also, because they're very closely paired. So if you're sexually abused, there's things that happen that they loop in your brain and they connect, because again, it's like things that fire together, wire together. And so it's very insidious. Things that look good can turn out to be not so hot. But anyway, I'm at the top of the mountain, as I call it, and I'm the little skier standing on the top of the hill, or the tobogganer, because I like to toboggan. So that was my analogy. I'm sitting in my toboggan, and every time I go down that toboggan, I'm going down the snow, and it's the same path that I go down every single time. So I run up the hill as fast as I can with my tools, and I slide down the hill, and 100% of the time I go down the exact same path, because that's the path that's actually been created. What I have to do is actually to pick up my toboggan, just move it a little bit, turn it a different direction, and it creates a whole different path. But to be really conscious about that at the top of the hill, because if you get down your track trying to, put a detour or a roadblock in there and then to go off on another pathway is much more difficult. It's not impossible, but so it's like that, really thinking and seeing it. Okay, here I am. Here's the path I normally take. When something upsets me, I open the fridge and I eat. Or I make potatoes, or I go and gamble, or I, call a friend and get distracted with whatever. But instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is actually sit here at the top and make a different decision about what am I doing? Go for a walk, move my body a little bit, go for a walk, and recognize what the feelings are that are right there. That might not be that comfortable, but but it's the intentional stopping the track as you start getting down it, because then your brain has all of these tracks. It's like there's an infinitesimal number of tracks that you can go down. And a lot of them, if you really let go, you go, I can go anywhere in this brain, because there's so much unexplored territory. That one little path is boring. I've been on it so many times. Why would I want to go on it more? Because so there's all of this, the playfulness between the neurology, seeing it, visualizing it, changing it, and then feeling happy, right? About, look at all these places I could go.
Yeah, that really feeds into your definition of virtue, is once again that we're at one place in our lives and we're trying to get to another place, and in between is all the stress. And well, that's peak performance, and basically we're trying to get to a higher level. And once you dive into it, it becomes extremely exciting, because then you find another way to go into a different part of the brain, or develop or heighten another state, which is just, once again, gives you a purpose behind all of this. And especially within that self-development, it's no longer this painful, let's get up and get to that seminar or read that book. It's, oh my God, how do I explore this part of the brain? Or what's this next thing that I can look at that's going to enrich my life and make it better?
Yes. Because even talking about it, it's like my bliss just goes ding, ding, ding. It's like, because I go, wow, look at all that stuff that's in there. I don't even know what's in there, but it's definitely a place of bliss, and it's easy to get to. And I didn't have to pay anything for that. And everyone's got it, right? It's just like.
And it's such a difference from the past, where it was, all of a sudden, you felt bad, so you did something that makes you feel worse.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah.
Mentality. Instead, you find something that makes you a little bit better, and then, oh my God, at least it's something that feels even greater.
Yeah. And to your wisdom though, also, Dave, for sure, of that the old behaviors are going to come back, like, so if you're really, for me, it was being really focused on the new behavior all the time. So anytime something would come up that would smack of the old stuff, I would just, it's like being so aware that you just go, nope. And automatically don't fight against that other thing, because that's what people do too. Oh, I'm just going to try to pray it away. No, it's like, or whatever, because you're fighting against versus going with the flow of what's actually good for you. So they're very different actions. Moving towards the stuff that's really good, is it good for you, whatever that is. So is very different than fighting against something. So I found that the more and more that I got practiced at actually really the analogy of putting myself at the top of that ski hill and just keeping going, moving back to the top. And if there was any sort of temptation, just going, no, I just need to actually get back on my toboggan. Because for me, it was a toboggan, and that was easy, so people have to figure out whatever their thing is. But that was really, really easy. And visually in my head, I could see the tracks, because I've experienced that in my life, right? Where I've gone to the toboggan hill, I've got drug up, I've sat in the big donut, I've rolled down, and actually the other thing about that is it gets faster and faster and faster each time you go down that track. So if it's a track you don't want, you're like screaming, going, no, I want to go down this track. Oh my God, it's so fast that I hit the bottom, and which is also true, right? So this whole.
Or other people are going to push you back into that track as well. And
right. Let's go here.
Whether it's your financial wealth, whether it's your health wealth, whether it's any of these, people are always going to intentionally or unintentionally try to steal it from you.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to protect it, because there's all sorts of influences around us that are going to, once again, try to put us back into that track that we always went down. So once you start feeling all this goodness and everything else, you've got to protect it.
Mm-hmm.
And that often comes with having to say that uncomfortable word no. To
write this down, everybody. Protect it.
Guard it, because it is your life. Like,
yes.
It's how you feel. And it's once again, what we put into the system is what manifests inside of it. So if we are in that an environment where we're around situations or tuning into things that are going to, once again, ramp up these fear or anger circuits that once again produce wealth for somebody else and steals your health, then you gotta dive back into, okay, well, how do I actually set up some boundaries and walls to make sure that I'm able to protect what virtue I've got.
Yeah. And as a parent or as a grandparent or a great grandparent, if you've had not that great an upbringing and you've had some pretty poor examples of virtue, or you yourself have struggled with these things that we've talked about, and you've got these little peanuts in your stewardship now, these little precious sacred babies, what can you do to, if you feel inspired and going, this, like, we have this opportunity to help these little people to be virtuous much sooner if we're healthy, because that's how they grow up then, as they go, oh, it's like, oh, right, this was like, oh, this is the way I'm supposed to be. This is, oh, I feel safe and secure and all those things. But in the cases, because there's lots of them now, where parents just give up because they don't feel very virtuous themselves, and grandparents also, because whatever they did, they've decided that they are going to be guilty for the rest of their lives about whatever it is. And they're certainly not in any position to impart wisdom on somebody else. I want to invite those people who think that way to think differently about it, because it's such an important role. And so maybe you can just talk about that, Dave, a little bit about what, adults can do for themselves, and then how they might view these little people that are in their care. What kind of things could they do to help to protect that brain if they're thinking about it?
You have to look at how their brains are going to develop, and it's through play, touch, laughing, and sharing all those joys. But of course, they also cry, they throw fits, tantrums, everything else. And it all starts prenatally again. So basically, the healthier the mother can be, the healthier the fetus, the healthier the baby. There's a reason why babies cry. And we got to figure out that reason, instead of saying, oh, they're just colicky, they'll grow out of it. No, something's uncomfortable inside of them, and they're crying. Well, that crying baby then develops into a toddler and everything else. And of course, then those pathways just get reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. So it's really, once again, looking at, well, how can you actually drive comfort and feel good sensations within a baby, and then into toddler, infants, all the way up, to teenager, everything along the way. Because once they get to being a teenager, if you haven't set it up before then, it's not going to go too well, and it's going to continually be worse, and it's going to drive down the parents and the grandparents and everyone else who's in that child's life as well. So it's all about, once again, trying to take away all the things that are going to cause bad plasticity within the system, and inject all the things that are going to cause good plasticity in the system. And don't overcomplicate it. It's just going back to, okay, well, how do you be the healthiest, joyfulest person you could possibly be? And just focus on that versus, once again, all the things that can go wrong in the system, because you'll drive yourself crazy if you look at it from that lens, versus, okay, well, how do we develop the good side of things and develop the plasticity that turn somebody into a great living human.
Yeah, love that. Because we've got the holidays coming up. There seems to be always holidays coming up and reasons to buy gifts for people. So one of the big offenders, I think, along the way, that it's become so insidious that people don't even think about it really very much, is this little thing here, which is the phone, the games, the nurseries that are filled with, 52 things that make sounds and project on the ceilings, and et cetera, et cetera. Can you speak a little bit to that, Dave? Is there any science about how good or not so hot that is for a baby's brain in the nursery, and then maybe just up through the ages, if you can give sort of a Coles notes, that would be helpful if there's research.
Yeah. Well, the first part of development, that like our brain is a sensory organ. So everything hits a receptor, goes through a nerve up into our brain, gets processed, then we have an output. Well, the whole thing is sensory enrichment. So the first sensory information that babies get are going to be touch, feel, and of course feedback from what food they take in, and smell, and a little bit with sight. But sight really doesn't develop until after the sense of touch develops. So the baseline sensory input is, once again, body sensations, touch, feel, and then it's okay, let's process more from the outside world. And you can have too much of a sensory stimulation, you can have not enough of it, or just the right amount. So I think right now what's happening with a lot of babies is we're not holding them as much. We put them into the little carry things, and instead of actually holding them skin to skin. And while you're not developing those primitive reflexes and that sensory touch and stimulation as much. And then two, we don't get down and play with kids as much as we probably should. And you start to see too little of that sensory input that was always there before. And then of course those systems don't develop well. Well, if you don't develop touch and that sense first, and connection between mother and child as well, then of course that baby's going to grow up with not having the same body perception that they probably would. And then later on, when we give children too much stimulation through games and light up toys, is we're really hitting the alertness centers higher up in the brainstem. And once again, we're probably doing it way too much. And if we develop that way too much, we can overstimulate that area and it may not develop as well, or we might be stimulating it so much that it becomes too plastic and fires too efficiently.
What's the consequence of that? That sounds good. Too efficiently sounds great. What does that mean?
Well, yeah, we see it with hyper intelligent people that really don't know their own bodies and feel too much anxiety and inward angst and too much pressure. And also in a lot of those people, that you might find more of those go forward emotions like anger and instead of happiness. And definitely instead of body perception. So having too much intelligence, well, we've noticed in history that if there's a fine line between genius and insanity in a lot of these people. You can have way too much of those circuits being way too efficient. And basically, the intelligence one is reacting to the outside world versus processing information from your own body. So there is that fine line between genius and insanity. And then, of course, you can go into the behavioral things of the narcissist. So once again, that's a pathway that's over efficient, and other pathways that are not working as well.
What is a narcissist? Can you give that definition from your perspective? We've got about 3 minutes left.
Okay. So narcissism, of course, is that extreme. And I think we call too many people narcissists, to be honest.
So too. Yeah. That's why I wanted you to actually say, what is it? Because
in some cases, they've got way too much perception of themselves versus others. So it's almost the opposite of being that insanely genius who's slightly crazy versus the person who's got too much perception of themselves that it overrides what they notice of other people,
Mm-hmm.
and they lack that connection because it's all about them. And of course, it becomes too a lot of the emotional development that happens as the nervous system develops as well. So of course the nervous system develops, but then we also put in all our associations with ourselves in the world as the system's developing. So it is that connection between nature and nurture. So one can make one better and one can make the other worse, or there's so many different combinations that can happen during that. So
yeah, so it's the all important role of the parents and the grandparents, I think. Thank you so much for talking about that. And one of the things that struck me is I heard a great quote this week, and I will look for whose quote it is, but I will share it at the end of this show today because I think it's so important. And the quote was, "You dismiss my predicament." And so this is like an internal question of dismissing your own predicament and then dismissing the predicaments of other people around you. So you can't help, and without a healthy brain, you dismiss your own predicaments and those of other people. Dr. Dave, any final words for this episode?
Dive into this stuff, and once again, look at the sensory enrichment with yourself and common, because right now we're in that hyperactive mode, and it's not doing ourselves any good. So we need to look at how to relax ourselves and look inward and develop that sensation within our nervous system to make ourselves and other people happy around us.
Love it. So Dr. Dave has delivered again. Dr. David Hardy, thank you for making me feel better today. You've done your part. You can give yourself a pat on the back. That's right. There you go. Give yourself. That's right. And so everyone, if you're looking for some brain health, other information, come to the masteryourlife.ca website. We have great products there to support brain health, and with all of the information and the science. So those of you who are the science nerds like Dave and I, you can check it out there. In the meantime, love yourselves, love each other, mind your minds. That's all for us. Bye for now. Thanks, Dr. Dave.
Thank you for being a part of our program today. Master Your Life is a presentation of Leaha Mattinson Enterprises, Inc. Join us next time on Master Your Life, helping you to discover the very best of you.